In the annals of forgotten histories, whispered tales often emerge from the dust-laden pages of time, speaking of events so peculiar, so utterly inexplicable, they defy all reason. Such is the story we unravel today, a chilling account from the nascent years of the American Republic, a time when gas lamps flickered against cobblestone streets and the wild frontier still beckoned with untamed mysteries. Imagine, if you will, a quiet, ambitious young man, a scholar of the esoteric, caught in the silent, suffocating embrace of a secret that would forever alter his perception of reality. This is the chronicle of Elias Thorne and the hotel room that, quite inexplicably, checked itself in. The year was 1812, and the air in Philadelphia, though bustling with the fervor of a young nation on the cusp of conflict, held a certain scholarly stillness within the hallowed halls of the American Philosophical Society. Elias Thorne, a man whose spectacles perpetually rested on the bridge of his aquiline nose, was precisely where he wished to be, amidst the scent of aged parchment and the hushed whispers of intellectual pursuit. At 28, Elias was a junior archivist, a position that, while modest, granted him unparalleled access to the esoteric and the forgotten. His true passion lay not in the grand pronouncements of history, but in its footnotes, its curious anomalies, the tiny wrinkles in the fabric of documented reality. He spent his days meticulously cataloging donations, a task most found tedious, but which Elias approached with the zeal of an archaeologist unearthing a lost civilization. His attention to detail was legendary, bordering on the obsessive, and it was precisely this quality that led him to the peculiar ledger. It was a standard leather-bound volume, seemingly unremarkable, among a stack of recent acquisitions from the estate of a deceased collector of curiosities. The collection itself was a hodgepodge of the fascinating and the utterly mundane. Taxidermied specimens with vacant glass eyes, ancient maps of lands that never were, and a surprisingly large collection of hotel registers from defunct establishments. Elias was sifting through these registers, noting dates and names for their historical context, when he found it. The book felt oddly cold to the touch, despite the warmth of the library. Its cover was smooth, unblemished, a stark contrast to the worn, cracked spines of its companions. It bore no title, no year, no identifying mark whatsoever. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in the best of times, tugged at Elias. He opened it. The first entry was dated simply, October 27, 1812, and next to it, under guest name, was not a name, but Room 7, and under point of origin, it read, "Here." Elias frowned, adjusting his spectacles. This was highly irregular. Hotel registers always noted a guest's name and their city of residence. He turned the page. October 28, 1812, Room 7, here. And again, page after page, for every single day of October, November, and now, into December, Room 7, here. Always Room 7. Always here. No name. No other guests. Just Room 7, checking in daily, from nowhere. Elias's heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. This was not a clerical error. It was too consistent, too deliberate. The entries were in a neat, flowing script, remarkably similar to his own, yet he knew he had never seen this ledger before. He closed the book, the leather cool against his palm. The anomaly was staring him in the face, a puzzle without a single discernible piece. He felt a prickle of unease, a sensation he usually associated with deciphering ancient, unsettling texts. This was different. This was a modern mystery, a phantom entry in a book that shouldn't exist, documenting a guest that wasn't a guest, from a place that wasn't a place. The quiet hum of the library suddenly seemed to amplify the silence around him. Elias Thorne, the scholar of the obscure, had stumbled upon something truly extraordinary, a tangible violation of reality tucked neatly into a stack of historical records. He carefully placed the ledger beneath a stack of less interesting documents, his mind already churning with a dizzying mix of fear and excitement. The clock on the wall ticked with unnerving regularity, counting down to an event Elias could neither predict nor prevent. He had an appointment with the impossible, and he knew he would be keeping it alone. The gaslight in the society's main hall began to dim as the night wore on, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to whisper secrets about Room 7 and its mysterious origin. The weight of the world's unexplained phenomena suddenly felt very heavy on his young shoulders. The peculiar ledger became Elias's silent obsession. He moved it to his study, feigning interest in its unusual binding to his superiors. Night after night, the gaslight hissed as he pursued his solitary, frantic inquiry. He scrutinized the handwriting, comparing it to samples from every known Philadelphia clerk, but the ledger's script remained a phantom, elegant and precise, yet utterly devoid of human variation. It was the writing of something deliberate, something mechanical. His fingers ran over the pages, the paper surprisingly thick and strangely cold to the touch. He held a magnifying glass to the edges, searching for a watermark, a flaw, any tiny signature that would betray its human origin. Nothing. Only smooth, unblemished perfection. The only sound in his study was the scratch of his own quill as he furiously logged his findings and the dry shush of turning the unnaturally crisp pages. Elias ran a series of futile, rudimentary tests. He smeared a drop of ink with a damp cloth. It smudged like any ink. He held a piece of the paper to a flame. It burned like any paper. The ledger was made of ordinary materials, yet its record was fundamentally impossible. He pored over old city directories, chasing every defunct boarding house and forgotten inn, searching for an establishment whose registers might be so carelessly kept. He found hundreds of Room 7s, but all were accounted for, their histories dull and entirely complete. Each dead and only amplified the singularity of his book. Room 7 here. It was a daily, tireless statement of persistence. The meticulous failure began to fray Elias's sanity. The frustration mounted, pushing him from intellectual curiosity to a state of desperate psychological obsession. He spoke to the book in whispers. "Where is your clerk? Why only you?" He began to perceive the room differently, feeling a prickle on the back of his neck, the irrational sense that he was not merely observing an object, but being observed by it. The consistency, the coldness, the utter lack of human error, it all pointed to something deeper than a simple hoax. This was a conscious, relentless record. His search for a logical explanation was over. The repetitive nature of the task, checking the same details, looking up the same information, made the hours drag, yet his mind raced with rising panic. This section was a battle not of strength, but of will, a fight between rational thought and encroaching madness. He closed the ledger with a sharp, final snap, the sound echoing loudly in the silent room. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that Room 7 was not merely a historical oddity. It was an active anomaly, and his overanalysis had somehow prepared him for its truth. He felt the tension rising, a silent scream of dread mixed with anticipation, waiting for the impossibility he knew must inevitably manifest. The intellectual dead end from his research had been reached. Elias was left with only the certainty that the ledger represented a violation of natural law. Days turned into weeks, marked by an ever-deepening sense of frustration and an unsettling intimacy with the bizarre entries. One brisk December evening, as a thin layer of frost began to glaze the cobblestones of Philadelphia, Elias found himself working late at his study, the only sound the faint scratching of his quill. He had been meticulously re-examining the ledger, convinced he had missed a subtle clue. His eyes, tired from hours of scrutiny, scanned the current page, noting the latest entry. December 14th, 1812. Room 7 here. He closed the ledger, leaned back in his creaking chair, and rubbed his temples. He was at a breaking point, exhausted and defeated, accepting the profound mystery he could not solve. Just as he was about to extinguish his lamp, a faint flicker caught his eye. It wasn't a shadow cast by the gaslight outside, nor a trick of his weary vision. It was a ripple in the air, directly in the center of his usually ordered study. It was as if the very fabric of the room had momentarily wavered, like heat rising from a summer road, or a heavy, invisible curtain being drawn aside. Elias froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He blinked, certain it was exhaustion playing tricks. But then, it happened again. The air shimmered, and a faint, almost imperceptible outline began to coalesce. It was rectangular, about the size of a standard door frame. A cold draft, carrying the faint, sweet scent of aged wood and something metallic, snaked across the floor, raising goosebumps on his arms. He could feel the air pressure in the room subtly shift, as if a heavy weight had just been gently lowered into existence. Elias, a man of logic and empirical evidence, struggled desperately to reconcile what his eyes were seeing with everything he understood about the natural world. He reached out a trembling hand, not quite touching the shimmering outline. It felt solid, yet ethereal, like trying to grasp a mirage. The silence in the study was absolute, save for the frantic beat of his own pulse. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible thump, the outline solidified. It wasn't a ripple anymore. It was a door, a plain, unassuming wooden door, set directly into the wall of his study, where moments before there had been only a bookshelf laden with ancient texts. The wood was a dark, rich oak, slightly weathered, and adorned with a brass knob that gleamed dully in the dim lamplight. It looked as though it had always been there, yet Elias knew, with an undeniable certainty, that it had not. He took a hesitant step forward. As his fingers brushed against the cool, smooth wood, a small, faded brass plate came into view, affixed just below the doorknob. Etched into its surface, in elegant script, were two words, Room 7. A gasp escaped his lips, sounding loud and fragile in the silent room. The ledger, Room 7 here. The words echoed in his mind, taking on a terrifying new meaning. The room hadn't just checked itself in, it had manifested. It had chosen his study, his sanctuary of reason, as its destination. Elias stood transfixed, a silent scream trapped in his throat. The impossible had just become terrifyingly, undeniably real. The suddenness of the door's appearance was a sharp jolt, shattering the carefully constructed wall between his mundane life and the impossible mystery he had uncovered. He looked from the ledger on his desk to the brass plate on the door, realizing the books were intrinsically linked. The appearance of Room 7's door plunged Elias into a maelstrom of conflicting emotions: terror, disbelief, and an undeniable surge of academic fascination. He circled the door cautiously, as if it were a dangerous beast. The wood was solid, the brass knob cool beneath his hesitant touch. He ran his hand over the faded brass plate, confirming the etched Room 7 with a shudder. It was here, it was real, and it was waiting. He spent the better part of an hour simply observing it, expecting it to vanish as mysteriously as it had arrived. But the door remained, a silent, unyielding monument to the impossible. The cold draft persisted, a subtle whisper from whatever lay beyond. Elias's scholarly instincts, honed by years of deciphering ancient puzzles, warred with his innate human fear. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to flee, to pretend it had never happened. But the lure of the unknown, the tantalizing possibility of understanding this profound anomaly, was too strong to resist. He knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified him, that he had to open it. He retrieved a small, ornate dagger he kept as a paperweight, its silver blade glinting in the lamplight. Not for defense, he rationalized, but as a symbolic gesture, a tangible connection to the grounded reality he was about to leave behind. He took a deep breath, the scent of old paper and something else, something subtly unidentifiable, filling his lungs. His hand trembled as he reached for the brass doorknob. It was surprisingly heavy, cool, and smooth beneath his palm. He turned it slowly, the mechanism clicking with an audible, metallic groan that seemed to reverberate through the silent study. The door swung inward with a soft creak, revealing not a darkened room, but a blinding, otherworldly light. It wasn't the harsh, white glare of sunlight, nor the warm glow of lamplight. It was a diffused, ethereal luminescence emanating from an unseen source, making it impossible to discern the details of the room beyond the threshold. The cold draft intensified, carrying with it a faint, cloying scent, a mix of dust, ozone, and something vaguely floral, yet artificial. Elias squinted, shielding his eyes with his hand. The doorway seemed to stretch, distorting his perception of distance. It was simply light. A profound, unsettling stillness emanated from within, a silence so complete it felt like a physical pressure against his eardrums. He took another shaky breath and stepped across the threshold. The transition was instantaneous and jarring. The warm air of his study vanished, replaced by the chilling, scented atmosphere of room 7. The floor beneath his feet felt solid, yet oddly resilient, like walking on a tightly woven rug that absorbed all sound. He slowly lowered his hand, allowing his eyes to adjust. The room was not blindingly bright anymore, but filled with a soft, constant twilight, as if lit by an eternal, unseen moon. It was a hotel room, unmistakably. A single bed, neatly made with crisp white sheets, occupied the center of the room. A small wooden nightstand with a flickering, unlit gas lamp sat beside it. A worn armchair, upholstered in a faded crimson velvet, was placed in the corner. A single window, heavily curtained, faced an unseen exterior. Everything was meticulously arranged, almost unnaturally so. But there was no door on the other side. Just the four walls, perfectly seamless, impossibly smooth, and the singular door through which he had entered. Elias stood in the center of room 7, a chilling realization washing over him. This wasn't just a room that appeared in his study. This was a room that existed outside of convention, outside of space and time. This was here, a pocket dimension, a sentient anomaly that had chosen him as its first, perhaps only, visitor. The air grew heavier, the silence more profound. A strange sense of anticipation, laced with dread, settled upon Elias. He was no longer just observing an enigma. He was inside it. The faint scent of ozone was unsettling, reminding him of something chemically unnatural about the room's atmosphere. He instinctively checked the dagger he carried, knowing it was useless against a conceptual prison, but finding a small measure of comfort in the cool steel. The initial shock of room 7's existence gave way to a chilling realization. He was not alone. The room, while appearing empty, possessed a palpable presence, an unseen occupant that filled the space with an unsettling weight. Elias stood rooted to the spot, his senses heightened, every nerve ending screaming. The silence was not truly empty. It hummed with a subtle, low vibration, a nearly inaudible drone that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The air, though still, carried the ghost of a scent, a faint, lingering perfume, old and delicate, yet strangely unsettling, almost like dried flowers left too long in a forgotten drawer. He cautiously moved towards the bed, its crisp white sheets impossibly smooth, devoid of any wrinkle. He ran a hand over the fabric. It was cool and soft, yet held a peculiar rigidity, as if perpetually pressed. There were no indentations, no signs of a body ever having rested there. Yet, the presence persisted, a silent observer in the twilight glow. He turned to the nightstand. The unlit gas lamp seemed to pulse with a faint, inner light, though no flame was visible. Next to it, a small, leather-bound book lay open. Elias approached with trepidation, his heart thumping. The book was a diary, its pages filled with elegant, sloping script. He recognized the hand immediately. It was the same script from the ledger, the one that recorded room 7 here. This was it, the voice of the room, or its occupant. He picked up the diary, his fingers brushing against aged paper. The first entry he saw was dated October 27th, 1812, exactly the same date as the first entry in his ledger. His eyes scanned the words, a knot forming in his stomach. October 27th, 1812. I awoke here. Again. The same room, the same silence. The world outside shifts, but room 7 remains. I remember nothing of how I arrived, only the overwhelming sense of being present, forever present. Elias's breath hitched. I awoke here. Again. The words painted a terrifying picture. Room 7 wasn't just a location. It was a state of being, a perpetual prison for its unseen resident. He flipped through the pages, each entry a testament to profound loneliness and an endless, unchanging existence. There were no names, no personal details, just observations of the room itself and the growing despair of its prisoner. November 20th, 1812. I feel a presence today. A faint disturbance, a ripple in the stillness. Someone is aware of room 7. Someone is looking for me, perhaps, or for this place. Hope, a foolish ember, flickers. This entry sent a shiver down Elias's spine. Was the diary's author referring to him? Had his discovery of the ledger somehow alerted the room, or its occupant, to his existence? The weight of the diary suddenly felt immense, a direct conduit to a suffering soul trapped within this impossible space. He looked around the room again, seeing it now through the eyes of its eternal prisoner. The meticulously arranged furniture was not neatness, but the desperate order of someone with infinite time and nothing else to do. He knew this wasn't merely an academic puzzle. It was a human tragedy, unfolding in a dimension beyond human comprehension. He realized then that the room was not empty. It was filled with the lingering echoes of a consciousness, a spectral inhabitant whose suffering resonated deeply within the silent walls of Room 7. The despair was so profound it felt like a cold, heavy blanket settling over his shoulders. The diary became Elias's most immediate and vital source of information, his only tether to the tragedy of Room 7. He spent hours reading it, perched on the crimson armchair, the unsettling silence of the room pressing in on him. The entries, though increasingly despairing, provided a fragmented history of the unseen occupant. The prisoner, whom Elias began to think of simply as the dweller, spoke of a gradual loss of memory, a fading recollection of their life before Room 7. Only fragments remained: a garden, the sound of rain, the warmth of a hand, but never a face, never a name, never a definitive past. December 1st, 1812. The hope of escape, once a roaring fire, is now but embers. I have tried everything, pounding on the walls, shouting into the silence, even attempting to pry open the window. Nothing. The room simply absorbs it all. It is a perfect prison, constructed not of bars, but of pure, unyielding reality. December 10th, 1812. I find myself speaking aloud now, though there is no one to hear. I describe the patterns in the wallpaper, the grain of the wood, the texture of the sheets. Anything to feel connected to something. My own voice is the only tether to sanity. The realization that the dweller was talking to themselves, driven to the brink by isolation, sent a pang of empathy through Elias. He felt an intense urge to speak, to call out, to let the dweller know they were no longer alone. But a chilling thought held him back. He wasn't sure if the dweller was still corporeal, or if they were merely a lingering consciousness, a ghost trapped in an impossible space. As Elias read, a faint, almost imperceptible sound began to emerge from the walls themselves. It was a rustling, like dry leaves skittering across a wooden floor, followed by a soft, ethereal whisper. The words were indistinct, fleeting, like dreams upon waking, yet undeniably present. Elias strained to hear, pressing his ear against the cool, smooth wallpaper. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, enveloping him in a disembodied chorus. He closed his eyes, focusing, trying to grasp the elusive syllables. He heard fragments: lost, forever, alone, cold, find the key. The words were laced with a profound sadness, an endless echo of the dweller's despair. The whispers grew stronger, intertwining, forming a faint, melancholic melody. It wasn't music in the conventional sense, but a haunting, wordless lament, a mournful hum that vibrated through his very bones. It was the sound of eternal imprisonment. Elias realized that these whispers were not just residual echoes. They were the dweller's current consciousness, trying to communicate, trying to reach out from their ethereal cage. The room itself was a conduit, amplifying their trapped thoughts and emotions. He opened his eyes, scanning the room, his gaze settling on the heavily curtained window. I dare not open them. What if there is nothing beyond? The dweller's words resonated in his mind. Perhaps the key to their release, or to understanding the room's true nature, lay beyond that curtain. It was a terrifying prospect, but one Elias felt compelled to explore. He was now inextricably linked to its silent, suffering occupant, and the whispers intensified, urging him forward, a chorus of ghostly pleas echoing in his ears. The whispers of the dweller, growing more insistent, directed Elias towards the window. He approached it with a mix of dread and resolve. The heavy velvet curtains were a rich, dark crimson, almost black in the perpetual twilight of Room 7. They hung perfectly, undisturbed, as if no hand had ever touched them. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing the thick fabric. It felt strangely cool, almost damp, despite the apparent dryness of the room. A faint scent of mildew, mingled with that peculiar artificial floral smell, emanated from them. He grasped the fabric, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The whispers intensified, forming a swirling chorus around him, a cacophony of fear and desperate longing. Don't. Nothing. Danger. Hope. He hesitated, the conflicting emotions of the dweller warring within the room. Was opening the curtain an act of liberation or a step into further despair? His academic curiosity, however, had long since transformed into a profound sense of responsibility. He had found room 7, and now he had to see it through. With a decisive pull, Elias drew back the heavy curtains. The sudden reveal was not what he expected. There was no bustling city street, no verdant garden, no endless void. Instead, the window looked out onto his own study. The very same study he had left moments ago. He could see his desk, the scattered papers, the extinguished gas lamp, the empty chair where he had sat, poring over the ledger. The perspective was slightly askew, as if he were observing it from a slightly different angle than where the door to room 7 now stood. It was his study, yet it was undeniably outside room 7. The glass of the window was thick, frosted around the edges, distorting the view slightly, making it appear as though he were looking through a warped lens. And most unnervingly, the study appeared deserted, lifeless. There was a thin layer of dust on the desk that he hadn't noticed before, and the papers seemed older, more brittle. It was as if he were looking into a still frame from a distant past or a potential future. Elias pressed his hand against the glass. It was cold, surprisingly so, and a faint vibration emanated from it. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the bustling city outside his study, the distant clatter of a carriage, the shouts of a street vendor, sounds that were utterly absent within room 7 itself. He was looking out of room 7 and into his own reality, but a reality that seemed subtly altered, frozen in time. The whispers around him intensified again, but this time they were different. A new emotion surged through the cacophony, a mix of profound confusion, a flicker of recognition, and an undercurrent of something akin to terror. My study. But how? The dweller's consciousness was processing the same impossible sight as he was. A new entry in the diary, he realized, would likely reflect this shocking revelation. He looked back at the door through which he had entered. It was still there, a portal back to his own time and space. But the window offered a glimpse of a disturbing truth. Room 7 was not just a self-contained pocket dimension, but one that seemed to exist parallel to his own reality, observing it, perhaps even influencing it in ways he couldn't yet fathom. The realization was chilling. Room 7 wasn't just a prison, it was a vantage point. And its occupant, unknowingly or not, had been a silent observer of Elias's world, perhaps for decades. The sight of his own study through room 7's window was a profound shock, a visual paradox that chipped away at Elias's sanity. The whispers around him morphed into a confused, mournful drone, reflecting the dweller's own struggle to comprehend the impossible view. He backed away from the window, his mind reeling. If this was his study, frozen in some altered state, what did it mean for room 7? And for the dweller? Was he, Elias, peering into a future, or a past, or an altogether different version of his own life? He tried to look closer, to find any distinguishing detail that might provide a clue, but the frosted glass and the strange twilight of room 7 made it difficult. He could see the general layout, the familiar books on the shelves, the stacks of papers, but no specific date on a calendar, no open book that he might recognize. It was a mirror, reflecting his own world, yet subtly warped. As he pondered this impossible scene, a subtle change occurred. The muted light from the window intensified slightly, and a faint, shimmering image began to coalesce within the glass itself, not through it. It was like looking into a disturbed pool of water. The image grew clearer, resolving into a vague, spectral reflection. It wasn't his own reflection. It was too faint, too ethereal. It was the outline of a person, standing in the very spot where Elias now stood, within room 7. The figure was translucent, like smoke, but undeniably human in form. It was a woman. Her hair was pulled back in a simple style typical of the early 19th century, and she wore a modest, faded dress. Her posture was one of quiet despair, her head slightly bowed. Elias gasped, taking an involuntary step back. This was the dweller, the unseen occupant, now partially visible, not through physical manifestation, but as a ghostly image reflected in the anomalous window. Her form flickered, almost dissolving, then coalesced again. He strained his eyes, trying to discern her features, but they remained indistinct, blurred by the ethereal nature of her reflection. He could only make out the general impression of sorrow and endless resignation. The whispers in the room suddenly intensified, coalescing into a single, agonizing lament. Alone, so alone, for so long. Elias felt a wave of profound sorrow wash over him, as if he were directly experiencing the dweller's centuries of isolation. He wanted to reach out to her, to comfort her, but knew it was futile. She was a reflection, a lingering echo. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse in the silent room. "What happened to you?" The phantom reflection remained, her head still bowed, her presence radiating a profound, melancholic grief. He realized then that she wasn't just a captive in room 7. She was room 7, or at least, her consciousness was inextricably intertwined with its very fabric. Her imprisonment wasn't just physical, it was existential. And the ledger, the one Elias had found, was not just recording the room's existence, but perhaps her endless, silent entries, her desperate attempts to mark the passage of time. The window, therefore, was not merely a view. It was a connection, a fragile thread between her impossible reality and his own. Elias felt a chilling certainty. The key to understanding room 7, and perhaps even freeing the dweller, lay not in leaving the room, but in delving deeper into its connection to his own world, to the very structure of time itself. The realization of the ledger's true purpose was a profound turning point. Elias knew the diary was not just a record, but a desperate attempt at communication. He flipped to the most recent entry, dated the same day as his current visit to the room. The elegant script, usually so controlled, was slightly shaky, betraying a renewed tremor of emotion. December 14th, 1812. A new disturbance. Stronger this time. The veil between realities thins. I saw a man. His face was blurred, but I felt his presence. He held my ledger. My ledger. He looked out my window. He saw my study. My past. Is this a dream? Or is it hope? Elias felt a profound chill. The dweller had seen him. The window wasn't just a passive view. It was a two-way mirror, a conduit. And the ledger he held, the one that had manifested the room, was the very same one the dweller called mine. This was the true purpose of the ledger, not merely to record room 7's inexplicable existence, but to bridge the gap between its dimension and Elias's. It was a tether, a key, a beacon. He looked at the ledger, then at the diary, then back at the faint, shimmering reflection of the dweller in the window. A wild theory began to form in his mind, outlandish and terrifying, yet strangely compelling. What if the ledger wasn't just a record of room 7, but a part of its mechanism? What if his act of finding and studying the ledger had somehow activated it, drawing room 7 into his reality? And what if the dweller, trapped within, was able to communicate through the ledger's entries, subtly guiding him? He remembered the peculiar coldness of the ledger, its unblemished cover, the quality of the paper. It was too perfect, too unique to be a mere archival error. He looked at the faint reflection of the dweller again. Her form seemed a little clearer now, a hint of desperation in her posture. Elias realized that the diary was her only solace, her only form of self-expression in an eternity of solitude. And the ledger, the twin of her diary, was her only link to the outside world, a silent scream for help across the dimensions. He thought of the constant, identical entries. Room 7 here. It wasn't just a check-in. It was a statement of perpetual existence, a defiant assertion of presence in a world that had forgotten her. It was a plea, a message, repeated endlessly, hoping someone would finally notice. Elias now understood the immense weight of his discovery. He wasn't just an observer. He was an unwitting participant in a cosmic rescue mission. The ledger, in his hands, was not just a book, but a responsibility. He had unknowingly become the dweller's only hope. He had to delve deeper, not just into the room, but into the very nature of its existence and its connection to the ledger. He had to understand how it had come to be, and more importantly, how it could be undone. The whispers around him shifted, no longer a lament, but a subtle hum of anticipation, a fragile current of hope. The dweller, through the reflection, seemed to be watching him, her silent gaze urging him forward. The hotel room that checked in itself was far more than a spatial anomaly. It was a temporal prison, and Elias Thorne held the key to its freedom, inscribed in the pages of an impossible ledger. With the realization of the ledger's true purpose, Elias felt a renewed sense of urgency. He now understood that the entries were not just passive records, but active transmissions from the dweller, a desperate attempt to bridge the dimensional divide. He felt a profound sense of responsibility to unravel the tragedy that had led to her imprisonment. He returned to the diary, sifting through its earlier entries, searching for any clue, any fragment of her forgotten past. November 15th, 1812. A memory, faint as gossamer. A grand ball, candlelight, the strains of a waltz. A handsome face, a stolen glance. But the face remains a blur, the name lost to the mists. December 2nd, 1812. I saw it again today, in a flicker of internal vision. A flash of lightning, a storm, a carriage ride. And then, the silence. The abrupt, deafening silence of Room 7. Elias exited Room 7 and plunged himself into the Society's archives. Days blurred into a frantic search. He wasn't browsing now. He was hunting. Old Philadelphia gazettes, police logs, and burial records flew past his eyes. The sound of rapidly turning brittle paper filled his study. Most reports spoke of mundane tragedies, fires, or common illnesses. Nothing that matched the violent, sudden disappearance suggested by the dweller's fractured memories. The memory of the storm, a carriage ride, and then silence hammered in his mind. He needed a date, a time, an event so unusual it had been recorded. He worked relentlessly, pushing past exhaustion, driven by the spectral plea of the dweller. The thud of heavy, forgotten books being pulled from shelves became the rhythm of his quest. Just as he reached the brink of despair, convinced he was chasing a ghost without a history, his eyes snagged on a faded newspaper clipping from October 29th, 1812. The headline, stark and chilling, read, "Tragic Disappearance of Young Heiress." The article detailed the vanishing of Miss Eleanor Vance, a prominent socialite. She had been traveling by carriage from a country estate back to Philadelphia during a sudden, violent thunderstorm on the night of October 27th, 1812. Her carriage was found overturned, but her body was never recovered, presumed swept away. Elias leaned back, clutching the brittle paper. The date, the storm, the inexplicable vanishing, it all aligned perfectly with the ledger's first entry. Eleanor Vance. The dweller had a name. A beautiful name, now laden with the weight of an unimaginable fate. The hotel room that checked in itself was not just a cosmic anomaly. It was the eternal prison of a lost soul, a young woman named Eleanor Vance. And Elias, holding the ledger that bound her, now knew her tragic story and her only chance at freedom. The search was over. The real work had just begun. The name Eleanor Vance resonated in Elias's mind, a mournful echo from a forgotten past. He now had a face, a story, a human tragedy behind the silent entries of Room 7. The newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle, spoke of her vivacity, her intelligence, her promising future, all abruptly extinguished on that stormy October night. Elias returned to Room 7, the ledger clutched tightly in his hand. The door materialized as before, and he stepped into the familiar twilight. The air, however, felt different. A palpable shift in energy. The whispers were no longer a confused cacophony, but a distinct, excited hum, tinged with a fragile hope. He looked at the window. The phantom reflection of Eleanor was clearer now, her head still bowed, but her form more defined, less smoky. He could almost make out the delicate curve of her jaw, the slight curl of her hair. He knew she could sense his discovery. "Eleanor," Elias whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Eleanor Vance." The word Eleanor seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the room. The whispers coalesced into a single, heart-wrenching sob, echoing through the silence. The phantom reflection in the window seemed to flinch, her shoulders shaking, as if in silent anguish. It was a moment of profound, shared grief across dimensions. He opened the diary to the most recent entry. The elegant script was there, but now a new, trembling hand had scrawled beneath it, in faded, almost invisible ink, "My name. He knows my name." Elias felt a wave of chills. Eleanor was not merely an echo. She was a conscious entity, able to interact, however subtly, with her own record. Her imprisonment had been so absolute that she had forgotten her own name, a crueler fate than mere physical confinement. Elias sat on the edge of the bed, the diary open in his lap, and began to speak, recounting the details from the newspaper clipping. He described the storm, the carriage, the overturned wreck, the official conclusion of her drowning. He spoke of how her disappearance had been mourned, how her family had searched in vain. As he spoke, the phantom reflection of Eleanor in the window seemed to grow more solid, more present. Her head slowly lifted. Her gaze, though still indistinct, seemed to be fixed on him. The whispers in the room morphed into a faint, almost inaudible murmur of understanding, of forgotten memories resurfacing. Elias explained his own journey, how he had stumbled upon the ledger, how its peculiar entries had drawn him into room 7. He spoke of his fascination, his fear, and ultimately, his unwavering determination to understand and, if possible, to help her. "You are not alone, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I am here, and I will find a way to free you." As he spoke the words, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from the ledger in his hands. The leather seemed to pulse with a gentle light, and the gold lettering on its spine, which Elias now noticed for the first time, shimmered, revealing the words, "The Vance Anomaly." It wasn't just a ledger, it was a key, a conduit, a binding agent for Eleanor's temporal displacement. The room, he realized, was not a natural phenomenon. It was an anomaly, a rift, perhaps even a magical construct, created by the intense energy of a life abruptly severed from its reality. And the ledger, unknowingly commissioned or owned by Eleanor's family, had become the anchor for her spirit, drawing her here. Eleanor's phantom reflection in the window seemed to reach out, a translucent hand pressing against the glass. The air around him crackled with a faint, almost imperceptible energy. The silence of room 7, once so oppressive, now felt charged with a profound, desperate hope. Elias knew then that he was on the verge of not just understanding room 7, but of altering its very nature. The revelation of Eleanor's identity and the ledger's role as her anchor sparked a furious, frantic bout of research in Elias. He exited room 7, the urgency of Eleanor's silent plea driving him. He devoured the society's most obscure collection, texts dismissed as archaic and dangerous by his peers. He scanned ancient grimoires, pored over philosophical treatises on the nature of reality, and delved into forbidden Paracelsian manuscripts. His mind was a battlefield, struggling to find logic in the illogical. His research was a relentless, quick succession of dead ends and fragmented clues. Temporal displacement? No, not that simple. Astral projection? Too ethereal. Alchemy? The binding of spirit to matter. He was looking for the flaw, the rule that governed this impossible room. He found fragmented theories in obscure texts, references to soul anchors or resonance objects. These theories claimed that objects present at moments of extreme emotional trauma could become conduits, binding a person's spirit to a location or dimension. The ledger, the moment of the carriage wreck. It absorbed the shock, the terror, the essence of Eleanor. Elias felt a surge of cold certainty. The ledger was the anchor. The consistent daily check-in was the loop, a perpetual existence the ledger was compelled to maintain. To break the loop, he needed to introduce change. He had to impose an external force upon a self-sustaining system. Destroying the ledger was unthinkable. It might only release Eleanor's spirit into a permanent void. The solution had to be in the record itself. If the ledger recorded her entry into this anomalous state, it must also record her exit. But he couldn't just write it. The entry had to be backed by a force strong enough to counter the anomaly. He needed an object of equal or greater resonance, an item that anchored Eleanor to her original reality, something she deeply cherished. He remembered the diary entry, a grand ball, a handsome face, a stolen glance. Love, a powerful, anchoring emotion. That was the counterforce. He needed something personal, something from her life, something that represented the world she was trying to get back to. He would find it, bring it into room 7, and use its emotional weight to force a new, final entry into the impossible ledger. the entry that would record her departure. It was a daring, unprecedented plan, fraught with unknown dangers, but for Eleanor, for the scholar, it was the only path forward. The frantic research montage culminated in this single, terrifyingly simple idea: find a piece of her life to unbind her soul. The next phase of Elias's plan was daunting. He had to find a personal artifact belonging to Eleanor Vance, something imbued with her essence, her memories, her connection to the world she had lost. His initial attempts to contact the surviving Vance family proved futile. The Vances, a proud and private family, had long since moved away from Philadelphia, their estate sold off years ago, their memory of Eleanor a painful, closed chapter. Elias knew he couldn't simply ask them for a soul anchor. They would dismiss him as a madman. He decided to search where her memories might linger, her former residence. Though sold, the Grand Vance estate on the outskirts of Philadelphia still stood, now owned by a distant cousin, a reclusive spinster named Mrs. Alastair, who rarely entertained. Elias, employing a combination of scholarly charm and sheer persistence, managed to secure an audience. Mrs. Alastair, a woman as brittle as dried leaves, received him in a dimly lit parlor, filled with the scent of lavender and mothballs. He concocted a story about researching prominent Philadelphia families and their contributions to the early republic, expressing particular interest in Miss Eleanor Vance, whose tragic disappearance, he explained, was a poignant historical footnote. Mrs. Alastair, though initially wary, seemed subtly softened by the mention of Eleanor. Such a vibrant spirit, she murmured, a flicker of sadness in her eyes. Gone too soon. Elias, sensing an opening, gently inquired if any of Eleanor's personal effects had been preserved, perhaps a keepsake, a memento. After all, he added, a life so promising should not be entirely forgotten. Mrs. Alastair considered this, her gaze distant. Most of her things were distributed or packed away in the attic, she finally said. Her father, God rest his soul, found it too painful to look upon them. She paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. There was one item, though, something she never went anywhere without. A small locket. Elias's heart leaped. A locket. Perfect. A deeply personal object, often containing sentimental value. A locket, he prompted, trying to keep his voice steady. Might it still be here? Mrs. Alastair slowly rose, a frail figure moving with surprising grace. Perhaps. It was said to contain a miniature portrait of a young man, her intended. A sorrowful tale that he died overseas, shortly before her own disappearance. She never wore another man's likeness after that. The story added another layer of tragedy to Eleanor's fate, strengthening the emotional resonance of the locket. A love lost, a life cut short, a keepsake holding the memory of both. She led Elias to a dusty, seldom visited attic, its air thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. After a considerable search through trunks and boxes, she finally unearthed a small, velvet-lined jewelry box. Inside, nestled on faded silk, lay a delicate silver locket. It was tarnished with age, but its intricate filigree was still visible. Mrs. Alastair, with a sigh, offered it to him. Perhaps it is time it saw the light again. Elias accepted it, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal. He could feel a faint, almost imperceptible warmth emanating from it, a ghost of Eleanor's presence. He knew this was it. The key. He had what he needed, a powerful resonance object to counteract the ledger's binding. Back in his study, Elias felt the gravity of the moment press upon him. He held the silver locket, its cool weight a tangible link to Eleanor Vance. He entered room 7, the door manifesting with its usual subtle thump. The room pulsed with a new energy, a palpable anticipation that vibrated through the air. Eleanor's phantom reflection in the window was now remarkably clear, almost solid. Her face, though still ethereal, was discernible, delicate features, wide, sorrowful eyes, a faint, questioning expression. She watched him, her gaze intense, full of a fragile hope. Eleanor, Elias said, holding up the locket. I found this. Your locket. Her reflection flickered, and the whispers around him surged, coalescing into a single, ethereal sigh, a sound of profound recognition and aching memory. He could feel her consciousness reaching out, a silent, desperate longing. He approached the nightstand and placed the locket gently on top of the open diary. As the silver touched the aged paper, a brilliant, soft light erupted from the locket, illuminating the entire room. The light wasn't harsh. It was warm, pulsating with a gentle, golden glow that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the room. The unlit gas lamp on the nightstand flickered to life, its tiny flame dancing with an impossible brilliance. The silence of room 7, once so profound, was now filled with a soft, melodious chime, like distant bells, growing steadily louder. Elias watched in awe as the light intensified, washing over Eleanor's reflection in the window. Her form solidified further, becoming almost entirely opaque, her features distinct, her eyes filled with unshed tears. She looked at him, then at the locket, then back at him, a silent gratitude in her gaze. "It's time, Eleanor," Elias whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's time to go home." He knew what he had to do. He picked up the ledger, the one that had recorded her endless check-ins. Its pages, usually blank save for the consistent Room 7, here, now shimmered with an inner light. He found the current date, December 19th, 1812. He looked at the next blank line. He picked up his quill, feeling a surge of connection to his own reality. He dipped it in ink, and with a steady hand, he began to write. He wrote her name, Eleanor Vance. And under point of origin, he wrote, not here, but Philadelphia. And under remarks, he wrote, checked out. As he finished the last stroke, the light in the room intensified to a blinding crescendo. The chiming bells reached a deafening peak, and then, abruptly, everything ceased. The light vanished. The bells fell silent. The gas lamp flickered once, then extinguished. The room was plunged back into its perpetual twilight. But something was different. The silence was not the same oppressive silence as before. It was empty. The lingering presence, the subtle hum, the faint floral scent, all were gone. And in the window, Eleanor Vance's reflection was gone. Utterly. The glass was now clear, looking out onto his study as it had been moments before he entered room 7, mundane and untouched. Elias felt a profound emptiness, yet also a soaring sense of relief. He looked at the ledger. The new entry was there, clear and bold, in his own handwriting. December 19th, 1812. Eleanor Vance, Philadelphia, checked out. The Vance anomaly on the spine glowed softly, then faded. The climax was over, the spirit set free. Elias stepped out of room 7, pulling the door shut behind him. The door remained for a moment. Then, with a final, subtle shimmer, it dissolved, leaving behind only the familiar bookshelf and the scent of aged parchment. Room 7 was gone. Eleanor was gone. The disappearance of the room left Elias Thorne with a profound emptiness, yet a soaring sense of triumph. He had faced the impossible, journeyed beyond the veil of reality, and, against all odds, had brought a lost soul home. But the experience had fundamentally altered him. The world, once a meticulously catalogued collection of facts, now held a shimmering layer of the inexplicable, a testament to realities unseen. He never spoke of room 7 to anyone. How could he? Who would believe him? He was a scholar, a man of logic, and his tale would undoubtedly mark him as a lunatic. The ledger, however, remained. He returned it to its place on his research shelf, no longer a source of dread, but a silent monument to his impossible journey. Its spine, once proclaiming the Vance anomaly, was now blank, smooth and unblemished, as if its secret had been wholly absorbed. The entries for Room 7 here still existed, a chilling testament to Eleanor's long imprisonment, but the final entry, Eleanor Vance, Philadelphia, checked out, now stood as a beacon of hope, a testament to her freedom. He often found himself gazing at the spot where the door to Room 7 had once materialized, a ghost limb of a room that no longer existed. Sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the library, he would swear he could still feel a faint, cool draft or catch the lingering scent of that artificial floral perfume. He kept the silver locket. It became his most cherished possession, a silent reminder of Eleanor Vance and the impossible task he had undertaken. He never opened it, feeling that its contents, a forgotten love, were too sacred to disturb. He wondered what had become of Eleanor. Had she returned to her body, wherever it was, awakening from an impossibly long slumber? Or had her spirit simply been released, finally at peace, moving on to whatever awaited beyond the boundaries of Room 7? He could only hope for the latter, a serene release from an eternal prison. Elias Thorne continued his work at the Philosophical Society, but his approach to history was subtly changed. He paid closer attention to the footnotes, the anomalies, the whispered tales that hinted at something more beneath the surface of documented fact. He became an even more dedicated champion of the obscure, the overlooked, the strange. He understood now that reality was far more malleable, far more mysterious, than anyone dared to admit. He never sought another anomaly, content with the profound, life-altering experience of Room 7. He had seen enough to know that some mysteries were best left undisturbed, and some truths were too vast for the human mind to fully comprehend. One day, many years later, a young assistant archivist, sifting through old documents, found a peculiar, leather-bound ledger on a dusty shelf. Its spine was blank, but inside, a series of identical entries read Room 7. Here, culminating in a curious final entry. Eleanor Vance, Philadelphia, checked out. The assistant frowned, puzzled, and showed it to the elderly Elias Thorne. Elias took the ledger, his aged fingers tracing the familiar script. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a secret memory warming his soul. He simply shook his head. Some things, he said softly, his voice raspy with age, are simply beyond explanation. Some rooms have a way of checking themselves in. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you can help them check out. He closed the ledger, the sound of the leather a gentle whisper in the quiet library. The hotel room that checked in itself had left its mark, not just on Elias Thorne, but on the silent, enduring fabric of history itself, a testament to the mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our perception. But it leaves us with the chilling question. If a room can choose to exist, what other secrets are lurking just beyond the threshold of our own reality? Let us know your theories about Eleanor's final fate in the comments below. Do you think Elias was a hero or just another pawn in a cosmic game? If you want more tales of impossible history and spectral anomalies, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. You don't want to miss our next story from the Forgotten Archives.